Hello and welcome. This is a quick and dirty tutorial to editing the QGIS Great Antarctic Hexcrawl data. So first of all, to start off, make sure that you've downloaded all of the files depicted here to a folder on your computer somewhere, and make sure that you've unzipped assets.zip to a folder called assets. And the next thing you'll want to do, obviously, is download and install QGIS. You can do this at qgis.org. It's totally free. When you open up QGIS for the first time, you should see something like this. First things first, we're going to double-click this to open a new empty project. The QGIS interface is composed of different panes. The ones that we're interested in today are the browser, which lets you search through your computer for different files that QGIS can load. The layers panel, which like in Photoshop or GIMP or something, lists all the things being displayed and allows you to toggle on and off whether you visualize them. And then the map canvas, which is here in the middle, which is where any data that we've loaded into QGIS will be displayed. So to start things off, go ahead and navigate to the folder where you downloaded your data. And before we actually load in the main project file, I'm just going to demonstrate loading in data at all. So we'll drag antarcticahexes.geopackage over and release it into our map canvas, and you'll see something just appeared there. We can pan the map around by clicking and dragging with the pan tool selected, and we can roll the mouse wheel to zoom in. As you can see here, these points are the hex centers. So each point corresponds to the center of a hex. If we right-click on the layer in our layer panel, and we go to Open Attribute Table, you will see that the hex data has a whole data table associated with it. How this works is every row is one hex. If I click row 1, you can see that the very first hex in the data layer is highlighted in yellow. If I click row 2, hex number 2 is selected, and so forth. Every hex has these different columns of data associated with it. So for example, every hex has an entry for terrain, it's got an entry for elevation, it's got a row and column index, and so forth. These columns are called attributes, so if you hear me talking about attributes later, that's what I'm talking about. We can display these attributes by going to the symbology pane. So if we right-click on a layer and pull up the properties window, it should start off with the symbology pane highlighted, but if not, go ahead and click this. And as you can see here, we've got single symbol symbology selected. That basically means QGIS is being told no matter what's in that data table, as long as there's a feature, like a row in that data table, with X and Y coordinates, just display this red dot over those X and Y coordinates. But if we want to display one of the columns in the attribute table, we could go to, for example, categorized, and we could pick out the terrain column, and then we could hit classify. And you can see that it's automatically given a random color to every unique value in that terrain table. And if I hit apply here, and then zoom out, you can see we have a very garish but ultimately intelligible map of Antarctica where every point is color-coded by the type of terrain it represents. Could also do this for a continuous value like elevation. So if I go ahead and select elevation with the graduated symbology type, and can pick whatever color ramp strikes your fancy. And then I'm going to do equal interval here, crank up the number of classes, hit apply, and you can see here that we've started displaying a different column in that attribute table, in this case one corresponding to elevation as I zoom in and out. Something to note for the future, right now notice that as I zoom in and out, the size of the points is staying the same, even as their spacing is changing. Anyways, that's about all I wanted to demonstrate for this first part, so let's go ahead and load in the main Antarctica file by dragging and dropping, and we'll just discard the current project. If you see this window pop up, just hit remove unavailable layers and OK. Give it a second to load. And I'm going to expand the layer panel because there's a lot more going on here now. So there are a bunch of these different layer groups, which are represented by these little like clippy icons. Each one of these is a cluster of layers, or like a bundle of layers that have symbology set for a different purpose. So for example, if I turn on BW2, that's like the black and white printing symbology. Simplicity's sake, let's just go ahead and remove everybody except for standard. And then let's turn standard on. So there are 5 layers in the standard symbology. Row column labels controls the row column labels for every hex. So you can turn those on or off as you please. Ocean is like an overlay layer that covers up the fact that the rivers were calculated for the entire terrain elevation layer, which includes underwater terrain. So we just hide those away with the ocean layer. Rivers obviously can be turned on and off. 6 mile hex points should really be called terrain. So you can toggle on and off the display of mountains and forests and what have you. And if you expand this, you can also toggle specific features on and off, like you could turn mountains on and off. Finally, topo colors just displays a different color for each hex based on the underlying elevation. So you can toggle that on and off if you want. So moving on, I'm going to demonstrate how you might go about, first of all, editing the type of terrain in a hex. So to edit our hexes, we want to select the layer we want to edit, which in this case is the 6 mile hex points layer or the terrain layer, and then click the yellow pencil to turn on edit mode, and then click the selection tool so we can actually select some hexes to edit. And say I want to, like say I've selected this area for my campaign setting, but I want to add some forest. I would draw a little box around the center of a hex to select it, and I would hold shift to select multiple. And you can kind of do this to, get like a organic looking blob for your forest. And then click this icon right here in the toolbox. That will bring up this like feature attribute edit window. And then in the terrain entry here, you will type in forest. And that's basically going to say, okay, in that big data table, for every selected hex, change the value in the terrain column to forest. So we hit OK. And then if we deselect them all, you can see that they have all been updated to forest. Now this is important. If you want these changes to persist through to your next time using QGIS, you're going to need to hit this save button. This save button is different from this save button. And the key is the project save button just saves the instructions you've given QGIS for loading and displaying data. The save layer edits button is actually going to save any changes you made to the layer file, in this case Antarctica hexes.geopackage, which is saved on your hard drive. The important nuance here is that many layers in our project are actually drawing on that same file, right? So like the topo colors is displaying the mean elevation attribute, the mean elevation column in that table. 6 mile hex points is displaying the terrain column in that table. But it's the same underlying file. And so if you edit the underlying file, like if I were to delete a hex, I would be deleting that hex for all of the different layers that use it. So be careful about deleting things and be careful about making edits. Just be cognizant of which layers are sharing the same base data. Next, say you want to change how a type of terrain is being displayed. Like say you want to change the color for forests. What we can do is we can go to properties and we can bring up the symbology for our terrain layer. Here, an important note, do not touch this symbol button. If you mess with that, it will overwrite the symbology for all of your different things. You're going to have to hit cancel and then reopen it. But if you want to change the symbology for a specific feature or a specific type of feature, you just double click on the symbol in this column here. So if we want to change how forests are displayed, we double click this. And the way this works is each symbol, right? Like what this is you're defining what QGIS is going to render over the center of every X and Y coordinate associated with each feature or each row of the attribute table. So in this case, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, first of all, you're going to render a hexagon. That hexagon is going to be rotated 30 degrees, so it's flat topped like God intended. And it's going to be colored green. And instead of having it change with the zooming in and out, stay constant, I guess, relative to the window size of the zooming in and out, like we saw with the points earlier, we're instead telling it, no, make sure that no matter how zoomed in or out we are, the width of the hexagon corresponds to 11,000 meters at the map scale, which means that as we zoom in and out, the hexes stay the same size relative to the actual territory being represented. So don't mess with that, basically. But if you want to change the color, say to something more your liking, you can go like that and hit OK and apply, and boom, you can see that the forest colors have changed. If you want to swap out the image, click the raster image marker. It's just a transparent PNG file, and we can navigate to a new one. So for example, I made a separate one here. We hit open, and OK, and apply. And now we can see that there's a different transparent symbol overlaid over our forests. But say you look at this list and you're like, okay, this is pretty basic. I want sick Morrowind-style fungal forests. We can do that too. Navigate to where you want to put your mushroom swamp. And like before, with 6 mile hex points selected and in edit mode, go ahead and do a selection and like grab the hexes you want. And as before, go here, and in terrain, you're going to plug in mushroom and hit OK. Notice our selection just disappeared. That's because we haven't given QGIS any instructions for displaying mushroom. So it doesn't know what to do, so it just doesn't display anything. To fix that, we go here, back to Properties, once again open the Symbology pane, and we're going to hit Classify, and that's going to tell QGIS, okay, go back through the terrain column and make sure you haven't missed any unique values. And it does that, and it says, aha, there's now a value called mushroom, and it adds it to our list. The best way to do this, I think, is we're just going to go ahead and we're going to copy the symbol from forest, and we're going to paste it onto the mushroom category, and then we're going to edit it. So we're going to change the color here to a nice shade of purple. And then for our raster image marker, I have already prepared a mushroom image here, which I will open, and we'll hit OK, and then we will hit Apply, and OK. And if we deselect all these, you can see that there are now nice, pretty looking mushroom forests. There are also some ones that appeared over here because this is like my 4th time recording this terrible tutorial, and so I'd already done some edits to the file. But anyways, yeah, that's how you would go ahead and add a new terrain type. So, all right, last thing I'm going to talk about here is rivers. So the rivers were done with a hydrology simulation. Unfortunately, the process of going from the outputs of that simulation to a line file is kind of janky. And so there are some areas that are kind of messed up, which I will demonstrate here. So I'm going to turn off editing for hex points. And I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to turn off most things except for oceans and rivers. I'm going to select rivers. I'm going to go to properties here. So the way rivers are symbolized, they have a width attribute in their attribute table. And that's going to control how wide the river appears on the map. So we're using the size method, and we're scaling the size from 500 meters to 1200. But to emphasize the issues with the layer, I'm going to crank this up to 3200, and I'm going to hit Apply. And it's going to take a second to load because it's a big layer. But you can now see that the wide river segments are even chunkier than they were. And you can see here that there are a few glitchy areas where basically we have a wide river segment and it's flowing along just fine, and then for some reason it becomes narrow, and then it widens out and then becomes narrow again. I did my best to get rid of as many of these as I could find, but there's a ton of rivers on this map. So if you're working with like your own subset of this map and you want to clean this up yourself, the way you would do this is very similar to how you edit the terrain. Otherwise, just go ahead, grab the selection tool, select your river segment, make sure you're in edit mode, and go here and edit, and then for width, bump it up. I think I'm gonna eyeball this and say it's probably like 15 or something, and then you can deselect it, and then just hit save to save your edits. So that's about it. So that should give you the tools you need to do some basic terrain and editing, and also fix up the rivers. I'm hoping to record a follow-up sequel to this where I also give a similar walkthrough for how you would go ahead and add some new layers depicting things like polities or regions, and also stuff like points of interest, which would have labels associated with them. So anyways, thanks for watching. Feel free to leave a comment. I apologize. I'm definitely not nearly as skilled or polished at video production as I'd like to be, but hopefully this was however rough around the edges, a little bit informative. Anyways, yeah, thank you, and see you next time.